going to be talking NFC South, starting with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They were the division winners last year. They were 13-4, lost in the divisional round to the LA Rams. And yeah, had a quite an interesting offseason. Lost a couple of pieces. Edge rusher Jason Pierre-Paul, as of right now, lost defensive tackle or defensive lineman Ndamukong Suh, although we will see if they bring him back. Tight end Rob Gronkowski retired. Tight end O.J. Howard also left. Running back Ronald Jones left as well. Guard Ali Marpet retired also. And then guard Alex Kappa left for the Cincinnati Bengals. And then in terms of it, and for a while, seemed like they lost Tom Brady. Obviously, in case you didn't know, he unretired, so he's back. But they also added wide receiver Julio Jones as of recently, wide receiver Russell Gage from the Atlanta Falcons, grabbed defensive tackle Akeem Hicks, got guard Shaq Mason via trade with the New England Patriots, added defensive back Logan Ryan, tight end Kyle Rudolph, and safety Keanu Neal. And then the draft, grabbed defensive end Logan Hall with the first pick in the second round, tackle Luke Godecki. Maybe pronouncing that wrong. If I am, I'm sorry, Luke. And then running back Rashad White in the third round. So yeah, John. And also too, sorry before I throw it to John. Head coach Bruce Arians he's no longer there, right? He's retired. I forget if he took a different role, right? I think, or did he retire too?
He's in the front office.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact role,
but
so he got moved up.
But he's not the head coach. He left that to Todd Bowles.
Yeah.
Byron Leftwich still there as the OC. So some of the same pieces, just no Bruce Arians, basically. So yes, now I'll throw it to you, John. What are your thoughts on the Bucs and their offseason and how this season will go for Tom Brady and them?
Well, obviously the Bucs, they're always going to be contenders as long as Tom Brady is playing because for the most part, although they lost a lot of key players, none of these guys were cornerstones of this team. And I'm talking like Mike Evans, I'm talking Levante David and Devin White, I'm talking Antoine Winfield Jr., a lot of the key guys, Vita Vea, Chris Godwin, the guys who have been there, who are the elite players on this roster, and that's no slight towards Jason Pierre-Paul, Ndamukong Suh, Gronk, all those players, Ali Marpet, because they all had really big impact roles, but they were not the key piece, I think, of their position group, right? So when you talk about the D-line, the guy on that D-line is Vita Vea. So when you lose pieces around him, that sucks, but you can start to replace those pieces, right? You talk about Akeem Hicks. We add Joe Tryon Shoyinka. If I mispronounced that, Bucs fans, correct me in the comments. But, I mean, they draft him last year, right? So he can be someone that can step up this year to fill the production that Jason Pierre-Paul left. And so there's just other players that I think are going to step up on this team that I'm not super worried about the pieces they did lose. Overall, the only thing I'm worried about is their offensive line, and that's because, yes, Ali Marpet retired, and that hurts, but then they got Shaq Mason to replace him. But they've had some guys apparently throughout this offseason that are just dealing with injuries. Even just right now on the overall depth chart, I know Ryan Jensen. I'm not sure how long he's going to be out, but he's out. So half the season could be longer, could come back earlier. I don't know, but Ryan Jensen's going to miss some games. I've heard that Tristan Wirfs was maybe dealing with an injury or two throughout camp. Nothing serious as of right now, but just the offensive line is a little bit more banged up. And a lot of the keys to Tom Brady's teams, even back to New England, is they've always had a really good offensive line. And that's important because Tom is not a mobile quarterback, and so he needs the protection. He doesn't need it long because he's one of the fastest quarterbacks to getting the ball out, but he still needs it, right? Because if you start letting Tom get hit and they can start getting in his face, that can really throw off your offense. And so that's the only thing I'm really worried about with this Buccaneers team. But other than that, they're still a Super Bowl contender. They don't really have any holes. I mean, like we talk about, they lose some of these key guys like JPP or some of those, but the additions in just the overall team, right? Keanu Neal, he was a solid linebacker for the Cowboys last year, and he can play safety too. We saw him do that with the Falcons. Akeem Hicks, I think that's kind of an underrated move because he is a line mover, and you put him next to Vita Vea. Their run defense could be even better this year after the year that they had the last couple of years. They lose Antonio Brown, but you get Julio Jones now, and Julio Jones is going to come with a lot less drama and baggage. And although he might not, I don't know, because he deals with some injuries, so he might not be as available as Antonio Brown. I think that at least at this point in their careers, they could both produce the same. And I think that he could have a little bit of a resurgence compared to what he did in Tennessee last year, because Tom Brady and the other two receivers on the outside, they can take a lot of attention away. Tom's going to find Julio in the spots that are going to be best for him. So I think he's going to be great. So I really like what the Buccaneers did this offseason. I don't think there's any moves they made that necessarily move the needle, but I also don't think they lost anybody that really makes them worse. So if anything, I would say the offseason additions are a net positive, especially when you include, the internal development they could have from some of their young guys, right? Like Carlton Davis, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Antoine Winfield Jr., guys who have been starting in this secondary for quite some time. And the secondary historically for this team has been the area of concern. If those guys can internally develop, I don't really see this team having many weaknesses.
Yeah, I think you really hit the main point is interior offensive line could be an issue. I think that's the really only main one concern I have, especially regarding the offense. Unless, Tom Brady doesn't show back up, because right now we're recording, he's taking a little absence, but I think we all expect him to be back. But yeah, because I know Ryan Jensen's out for a while, and I forget their backup's name, but I know I'm not sure how severe the injury was, but he got dinged up in practice a couple of days ago too. So all of a sudden, they may be on their third string center, and anyone that knows football, the center quarterback is a very important relationship, and especially when you're going against some of these great defensive tackles, it's man. If you're not up to par, it's going to be a long day. But yeah, I am okay. So I'm sorry. Another concern I would have maybe a little bit. I know you mentioned they filled in some pieces in defensive line and the front seven, which has been really good for the past few years. But you never know if those pieces will fit in perfectly. Now, because now that you mentioned Joe Tryon, can he step into the bigger role? Because he was more of like the third/fourth guy last year. Kind of came in just to spell the other guys. Can he take on that full role for 17 plus games? We'll see. But nonetheless, like you mentioned, they filled in. They know they were in in the contending window. They're just going to try to fill the holes that were left in the offseason, like Kyle Rudolph and such. Obviously, Kyle Rudolph may not be to the level like Gronk was last year, but if you get close enough, and maybe if a few other guys can develop and just be better, maybe especially on defense, you still have some good young pieces. Antoine Winfield Jr., like you mentioned, and he's one of your top 5 safeties. We think we both mentioned he's getting up there in terms of one of the better safeties. Carlton Davis also has been one of the better corners for them, and they've had some good guys behind him too. And obviously with Todd Bowles' system, they're going to put a lot of stress on those guys, but also kind of help them out with the blitzing. It's kind of like a give and go. So, we'll see. Obviously, if we'll see if the Bruce Arians leaving is a huge effect, because also lost a few running backs. We'll see if Leonard Fournette can basically be the main guy. I know they drafted, like I mentioned, Rachaad White. A lot of people like him. Maybe he could be a good number 2, but that would be my only other concern too, is maybe if Leonard Fournette, he has gotten dinged up a couple of times the past few years. He's a very physical back, as we all know, so it's going to happen. So depth may be an issue going down the line, especially at running back. So, but nonetheless, like you mentioned, as long as number 12 is back there, even if they lose pieces here and there, Vita Vea has been in and out. As long as Toll's back there, I expect them to make the playoffs and to be in that Super Bowl conversation, especially with this talented of a roster. So, looks like we both expect pretty much status quo from the Buccaneers going into the season.